Okay, guys. Now this, I guess, it was published by a Virginia newspaper, and it said the Negro race has billion in United States. I guess it was land or something like that. It was cut off from the picture from what this person had posted, but it basically says return of colored people to dirt continent is impossible owing to material progress made by them, it is announced. Kansas City, Missouri disenfranchised the Negro and sent him back to Africa. Absurd. Impossible. More than $1 billion worth of United States real estate, which he owns in his own name in the United States, is not easily to be taken from him. Besides, the Negro is not an African. He is an American. African is a misnomer. Why try to send him to a country which he is not his own? And we're gonna send it. We're gonna save it right there. Okay. So they tell you right there. They told the truth that the Negro is not an African, and that Negro and African are not synonymous with each other. And these people knew this, and I guess this was. I want to say that this newspaper probably was printed or published back in the 1920s. I'm guessing. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so it says shocking facts about slavery, natives, and Native Americans. It says here the term Negro may have been meant for American Indians, the session Native Americans at 1619. Dr. Erika Coleman, professor at the University of Delaware, who's of Rappahannock and African American descent, discussed how it might actually be referring to the American Indian in her book that the blood stayed pure, according to her 2013 book that the blood stayed pure, the terms can be traced to medieval Italy, where it was a classification, not race. Additionally, Europeans often referred to our populations in their communities as Negroes. In the colony of Brazil, Indians were called Negros de Terra, meaning the blacks of the land, or Negroes of the land. It says it pointed out to the conference that the early Virginia identified Moors and Negroes separately, and there also was a mention of individuals described as Negro African, which brings into question why the words would be used to describe a person, suggesting the native meaning as the strong possibility. So I'm going to leave that right there. About what he had to say, what he said about Melville Hershovitz, Boas, Charles Darwin, and all the other whites of European and or African descent, how they went, the true Africans, how they went ahead and basically finessed and concocted a lie, and basically said that the American Indians were the Negroes were of African descent, with basically no proof at all of such a thing. Okay, so now we're going to look at the terms that they used for the American Indians. It says the use of terms Negro and Black to include persons of Native American ancestry in Anglo North America by Jack D. Forbes. It says in 1984 the California State Supreme Court sought to bar all non-Caucasians from equal citizenship and civil rights. The court said, now watch this now. It says 1854, California State Supreme Court. This is what they said. They said that the word black may include all Negroes, but the term Negro does not include all black persons. It says, we are of the opinion that the words white, Negro, mulatto, and black person, whenever they occur in our Constitution, must be taken to the generic sense. The words black person in the 14th section must be taken as distinguished from white as, and necessarily includes all races other than Caucasian. And then it says here, the tendency to create two-caste societies often clashed with the reality of territory, which included many different types of people, all colors, different degrees of intermixture of European, American, African, and Asian. It says Native American, as we know, Native American is really the American Indians, whether of unmixed ancestry or mixed ancestry or other stock, were tendency to create a purely white and black social system, especially when living away from a reservation or ancestral homeland. Okay, so, and then it says, in the manner that Americans and part Americans were sometimes classified as mulattoes and people of color from New England to South Carolina and the Spanish Empire or are explored elsewhere. The purpose here is to illustrate how the term Negro was also been applied to people of American descent. The possibility of Native Americans were quite commonly called Negroes is very much supported by the Portuguese usage during the colonial period of the Brazilian Indians were repeatedly referred to as Negroes or Negros de Terra, the Negroes of the land. A great many examples from the 16th and later centuries are cited by George Farici in his analysis of Portuguese sources. The Portuguese usage is extremely significant not only because American or part American slaves could be referred to as Negroes in the early shipment records, but also because it very affects one's analysis of population statistics in colonial Brazil, which in fact the categories of Negro and mulatto must have included domesticated or enslaved Indians and mixed bloods. Okay. And then you see it says Negro became synonymous with a slave or servile status. Okay, so that's talking about Indians being referred to as Negroes by the Spanish and by the Portuguese. Okay, so it says shocking facts about slavery, natives, and Native Americans. It says here, the term Negro may have been meant for American Indians, the session Native Americans at 1619. Dr. Erika Coleman, professor at the University of Delaware, who's a Rappahannock and African American descent, discussed how it might actually be referring to American Indian in her book that the blood stayed pure. According to her 2013 book that the blood stayed pure, the terms can be traced to medieval Italy, where it was a classification, not race. Additionally, Europeans often referred to our populations in their communities as Negroes. In the colony of Brazil, Indians were called Negros de Terra, meaning the blacks of the land or Negroes of the land. It says it pointed out through the conference that the early Virginia identified Moors and Negroes separately, and there also was a mention of individuals described as Negro African, which brings into question why the words would be used to describe a person, suggesting the native meaning as the strong possibility. So I'm going to leave that right there. Okay, so I know this is, information that I have talked about earlier in other videos, but it's needed to be talked about in this video when we're talking about white people who are descendants of Africans, people of real African descent, the Europeans, how they had convinced the American Indians that they're Africans, and the truth is, it's the white folks who's the ones who are the descendants of Africans, who have strong ties to the continent of Africa, since their ancestors migrated from Africa, like the Grimaldi man and other species of human beings that came from out of Africa and went directly into Europe, according to their scientific discoveries. So, anyways, it says how a long dead white supremacist still threatens the future of Virginia's Indian tribes by Joe Hing, July 1st, 2015. And now you see this man right here, this white man, Walter A. Plecker, goal as Virginia's Register of Vital Statistics was to ban racial mixing. He declared that there was no true Indians left because of marriages with blacks. Now, we already know that the Indians was reclassified as blacks ever since the colonizers from Spain had came over here, and then later on the ones from France and then Britain came over here because they had documented, like Hernando de Soto and Columbus, they had routinely referred to the population of the American Indians as Negroes and blacks, and they did the same thing on the census. So anyways, it says Virginia's Indian tribes have faced numerous obstacles in their decades-old quest for federal recognition, but one person has long stood in their way, and he's been dead for 68 years. Walter Plecker, a physician, eugenicist, and a vowed white supremacist, ran Virginia bureaus of vital statistics with a single mind resolve over 34 years in the first half of the 20th century. Though he died in 1947, Plecker's shadow still lingers over the state, a vestige of a vicious era when racist practices were an integral part of the government policy, and Virginia officials ruthlessly enforced laws created to protect what they considered a master white race. For Virginians, the policies championed by Plecker threatened their very existence, nearly wiping out the tribes who greeted the country's first English settlers, who claimed Pocahontas as an ancestor. This month, the legacy of those laws could again sabotage the effort by the Pamunkey people to become the state's first federally recognized tribe. It's as obsessed with the idea of white supremacy, superiority. Plecker championed legislation that would codify the idea that people with one drop of Negro blood could not be classified as white. His efforts led to the Virginia legislature to pass the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, a law that criminalized interracial marriage and also required that every birth in the state be recorded by their race, with only options of being white and colored. Okay, it says Plecker was proud of the law, that his role in creating it, it was, he said, the most perfect expression of the white ideal and the most important eugenicidal effort that was made in 4,000 years. The act didn't just make blacks in Virginia second-class citizens, it erased any acknowledgement of Indians. It says, whom Plecker claimed no longer truly existed in the Commonwealth. With a stroke of a pen, Virginia was a path eliminating the identity of the Pamunkey, the Mattapanomi, the Chickahominy, the Mancan, the Rappahannock, and the Nasamon, and the rest of Virginia's Indians. Okay, so as we see here, they mention the term Negro, they mention the term colored, they mention the term black, which we know are all misnomers of the American Indians.
To come to grips with their true identities. The so-called African Americans of today's society are yet still struggling to come to grips with their true identities, cultures, heritage, and especially their actual history, simply because of how they were taught to believe in a fictitious story that claimed that all people of color in America are somehow descendants of Africans. The problem with this story is that there is no verifiable evidence of it actually being truthful information. I'll get into why here shortly. And yet, there are many so-called blacks or so-called African Americans that are willing to go to their graves with a very strong belief in this falsified information. See, this is why I single-handedly write, edit, and produce my content for viewers like yourself, in hopes that you would take the initiative to literally note all of the information that I present throughout my content, so that you may be inspired to conduct your own research using those same key factors manifested within my works. Now, with all of that being said, let's go back in time a little to where this fictitious propaganda was cultivated and implemented into our mindsets as a fact of one-sided historic information. Melville John Herskovich was born on September 10th, 1895, in Bellefontaine, Ohio, to two Jewish immigrant parents who immigrated from parts of Europe to North America during the mid-1800s. His mother, Henrietta Hart, was an immigrant from Germany, and his father, Herman Herskovich, was an immigrant from Hungary. Before becoming a teenager, the family moved to El Paso, Texas in 1905. Then, soon after his mother abruptly passed away from a mysterious illness, Melville and his father moved to Erie, Pennsylvania, where Melville later graduated from Erie Senior High School in 1912. Melville began his college studies at the University of Cincinnati, while simultaneously taking rabbinical studies at the Hebrew Union College, Cincinnati campus, as traditionally suggested by his family, being as though the college is a Jewish institution of religion. When the United States involved themselves in the conflict known as World War I on July 28, 1914, history loves to state that Melville allegedly quelled his studies to enlist in the, quote, Army's Medical Corps and headed off to Europe. Now, keep in mind that his mother was from Germany and his father from Hungary, in which both places, including Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire, fought against Russia, Italy, France, Japan, Romania, Great Britain, and of course the United States. What's very noteworthy here is which side of the conflict Melville allegedly subscribed to, because there is no actual records of him enrolling in the United States Army in the first place. Yeah, and I'm just getting started here.
Hi there, I'm Sophie Howard and I'm at a trade show in Germany looking for products that I can sell on my Amazon.
Now, when he returned to North America, Melville transferred to the University of Chicago at a time where anthropology was heavily influenced by the deceitful hidden agendas of industrialism, along with political European colonialism, where pseudoscientific theories were not only praised by one particular group of people, but justified for its subjugation of all non-white people. Before World War I began, in a speech directed to accredited businessmen, President Woodrow Wilson stated that henceforth public policy will be geared to providing a public education tailored to producing industrial workers who did not question orders and were skilled in only basic manual labors, and that a liberal education will be reserved only for a small elite. By the early 1900s, American industrialists recognized that compulsory public education was the most useful means to socially engineer the American population to suit the purposes of industrial capitalism. Local networks of corporate foundations, university education and psychological departments, educational accrediting boards, and governmental agencies arose to oversee the implementation of the blueprint for this ambitious but yet so devastatingly evil social engineering project. These entities included organizations such as the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Columbia Teachers College, the University of Chicago, the National Training Labs, the National Education Association, and the U.S. Office of Education, now known as the Department of Education. Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and Henry Ford were the key contributors and introductional architects of this American educational system of forced schooling. According to Lee D. Baker, an author and a cultural anthropologist out of Duke University, he admitted that the 19th century physical anthropologists drew specious correlations between anatomical features and supposed behavior traits of the various races. So in other words, these immigrants of Jewish or other European or African descent of the 19th century, or rather the 1800s, purposely created and cultivated the science of anthropology with highly regarded racial discriminatory, very identical to the pseudoscientific concepts designed and utilized by Francis Galton that he called eugenics, right along with his predecessor, Charles Darwin, with his theory of evolution and natural selection, in which I mentioned more about this on my documentary called What's the Real Identity of an African American? I highly recommend that you watch that video as well. Now, getting back to Melville, he abruptly halted his studies at the Hebrew Union College and then moved on to complete his graduate studies at Columbia University. What's very important to note here is while working on his master's and PhD, Melville found himself under the guidance of his professor named Franz Boas, a German immigrant from Minden, Germany, who migrated to North America during the year of 1887. Franz Yuri Boas was considered to be the sole author of American anthropology. In fact, he was dubbed as the grandfather of American anthropology by his self-proclaimed significant students, with Melville being one of them. As a professor of anthropology at Columbia University beginning in 1899, Franz heavily influenced many prominent people that we know of today, all the way up until his death on December 21st, 1942, and some of whom shares the same hue of complexion as you and I. Franz had his own hidden agenda, but history loves to paint the picture as if it was done for the better good, when in fact it was designed to upkeep the continuation of manipulative indoctrination. For example, Franz promoted an idea that Negroes residing in America are all somehow descendants of Africans in Africa, based solely on the fact that we all share the same hue of complexion, and that's it, meaning that's all of the evidence he had. Now keep in mind that this was the first time ever in history where people overheard rumors that Negroes are somehow Africans now. Then, the Harvard-taught sociologist and one of the co-founders of the NAACP and the first so-called person of color to even earn a doctorate at this time, named W.E.B. Du Bois, took this fictitious idea to new heights, being as though he was considered to be a person of color, providing another side of social engineering influence amongst people that shared his same hue of complexion.
If you look at every person with a credit score over 800, they all have one thing in common. It's not that they pay their
paintings that are now this Montanez that he made of the people. And it says here, colonial Southeast United States, Virginia. Let's look at this picture. Now, and you see these people right here. These are Indians. They're bathing. They have short little afros. There's one person here. He has a feather crown look like on his head. And the other man, he has look like some sort of other type of crown. And then over here you have some other Indians that have their headdresses on. And they have short little fros. And then this man here, he definitely looks like what you consider as a Negro. So these are your Indians at that time that were being called Negroes. This is how your ancestors look. And then you have some right here who had a wavier, straighter texture of hair. And it says Virginia and Florida on this particular map. So now I'm going to go back. Okay. And let's see. This one says Brazil. Just showing people on this map. Okay. And they also look like they were dark-skinned Indians as well. So those are the people that the Portuguese were talking about. Then let's look at this one. It says Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina. Now right here, it's Paraguay. And you look at these people, you see that they have on a feather crown. This man, he has on like a bird. It's on his head. Then this man has on some sort of skin. And then this man, he has on a feather crown, just like my chief. And then you see this little baby here. He has an afro. So these are the people these are countries that's in South America. And you look at their complexion, they have like a reddish brown color. Okay? And then it says here, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina. Now this was, I think, another work by Arnaldus Montanez. Okay, so those were the people. This is just proof of who the Portuguese and the Spaniards were calling Negroes and why they called them Negroes. And you can see because of the color, because of their complexion. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about cranial morphology of the early Americans from Loga Santa, Brazil. Implications of the settlement of the New World, but we know it's not the New World. It's only new to the Africans. And so Walter A. Neves and Mark Hubb, it says comparative morphological studies of the earliest human skeletons of the New World, which we know is the Old World. It says have shown that whereas late prehistoric, recent, and present Native Americans, which are supposed to be American Indians, tend to exhibit a cranial morphology similar to late and modern Northern Asians, short and wide neurocrania, high orthogonic and broad faces, relatively high and narrow orbits and noses. The earliest South Americans tend to be more similar to the present day Australians, Malaysians, and Sub-Saharan Africans. I'm going to stop right there. So, and then, I wanted to mention this part right here at the bottom. It says the affinity of South American Paleo-Indians and the extent of the Austro-Malaysian group supporting the hypothesis, meaning that there's a close, distinction. It's a close similarity between these people. Okay, so anyways, so there you have it. That they told you exactly how the first inhabitants, the people who first settled, South America or Brazil, how those people look, and you already seen the maps of the people from South America, and you already know that the people, the Portuguese and the Spaniards, that they saw the Indians that was down there, and they referred to them as being Negroes. So now you see the scientific evidence of the skulls in Brazil, which is in South America, also shows the fact that these skulls look like people from what they want to call Sub-Saharan Africa and Australia and Malaysia, which all are people that would be considered as Negro.